Although I was aware that Alyssa was wealthy, I never thought her father would mock me in such a way. I sat in their magnificent house, surrounded by luxury I had never seen before, and my heart raced. My fingers twitched against the moist fabric of my trousers as I gripped the tiny velvet box in my pocket. I thought love would suffice, but I was mistaken. The room smelled of tense sweat, mixed with pricey fragrance and old wood, a scent that lingered in the air, making me realize I didn't belong here. Gerald Whitmore, sitting like a monarch on his throne across from me, had a piercing gaze, scrutinizing me. Alyssa sat next to him, her hands neatly folded on her lap, her eyes lowered. I was just a farmer, daring to ask for his daughter's hand. I cleared my throat and spoke with confidence. "Sir, I adore your daughter. I know I don't come from money, but I love her and I want to marry her." Gerald scoffed, his upper lip curling in disdain. "A man like you? A recent high school graduate without a meaningful job?" He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, what do you believe you can offer her? A life of struggle? Misery?" His words cut deeper than I expected, but I clenched my fists under the table and swallowed the lump in my throat. I had known poverty all my life. I understood what it was like to be looked down upon, but never to this extent, never with such utter contempt. And then he did something I will never forget. He grabbed his delicate china mug, its handle glittering under the chandelier's light, and flung the contents at me. The lukewarm tea splashed across my shirt, soaking into my skin. The weight of my humiliation froze me. My ears rang, my heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at me to lash out, to say something. But what crushed me more than his words was Alyssa's silence. She didn't protest. She didn't stand up for me. She just sat there, frozen, unwilling to even look me in the eyes. That was the moment I realized she wouldn't fight for me. Slowly, I pushed my chair back, its legs scraping against the polished wooden floor. "Please, pardon me," I muttered, my voice steady despite the humiliation. And then I left. My dignity was in ruins. That night, as I stared at my phone, I knew one thing for certain. Gerald Whitmore had made it clear. I would never be enough. I believed that was the end of us, and so I buried the pain. I drowned myself in work, taking every shift I could at Rivers & Burke Law Firm, a small but reputable practice that took a chance on me. I started as a clerk, filing records, fetching coffee, helping junior attorneys. Not much, but more than I'd ever had before, and I refused, absolutely refused, to let Gerald Whitmore be right about me. My boss, Lucas Rivers, saw potential where others saw a nobody. He was more of a father to me than my own had ever been. He taught me the law. He taught me strategy. But most importantly, he taught me to fight. "This profession requires more than intelligence," he told me one night as I stayed late, studying legal documents. "Clients don't just want a lawyer. They want a warrior." And so I became one. I was the first to arrive at the office every morning, the last to leave at night. I studied case files until my eyes burned. I memorized legal tactics. I learned every move the senior attorneys made, and it paid off. Within 2 years, I was no longer just a clerk. I was drafting legal arguments, conducting research, attending crucial meetings. My name began to carry weight, but no matter how far I climbed, I couldn't erase her, Alyssa. She faded into the background of my life, yet she never truly disappeared. I convinced myself that it was over. That her silence had been my answer. But some nights when the office was quiet and the city hummed in the distance, I found myself wondering, did she regret not speaking up? Did she miss me? Did she ever wonder if I had made a mistake by not reaching out? I refused to be the man who begged, and over time I convinced myself that I had moved on, until one night, Reality tested that lie. A junior associate passed by my desk, flipping through a tabloid, and for some reason my eyes caught the headline, "Whitmore heiress engaged to real estate tycoon." I shouldn't have cared. I had no right to feel anything, and yet I stared at that article longer than I should have. She was smiling, the perfect woman beside the perfect man in his perfect navy suit. I shut the tabloid and went back to work. But that night, I didn't sleep, because the truth weighed heavy on my chest. I had spent years becoming the man I wished I'd been that night in her father's house. And now, the woman I once loved was marrying someone else. That should have been the end. But instead, it ignited a fire inside me. I pushed harder, worked longer. If I couldn't have her, I would have something greater. Success. And 10 years later, I entered the next phase of my life. I was no longer a clerk, no longer the boy who had entered the Whitmore estate, naive enough to believe love was enough. That version of me had died the night I walked out of their home, tea staining my shirt, my dignity shattered. I had rebuilt myself, under rejection, under pressure, under the weight of knowing I would never be enough for them. I had sacrificed sleep, relationships, anything that stood in the way of my goal, and I achieved it. I passed the bar, I became an attorney, and I built a name for myself, one that even Gerald Whitmore couldn't ignore. Then, fate stepped in. One morning, while briefing a client at the courthouse, I felt a familiar presence. A shiver ran up my spine. I turned, and there he was, Gerald Whitmore, the man who had humiliated me. But something was different this time. His smirk was gone, and in its place, recognition and something else, something I never thought I'd see in his eyes when he looked at me, doubt. And then, I found out why he was there. He wasn't just passing by. He was opposing counsel, standing against me in court, and this case, it was a high-profile divorce, a scandal, a media frenzy. He represented the defendant. I represented the plaintiff, a woman who had endured years of infidelity and abuse. And I was ready. I let Gerald see the boy he had mocked all those years ago. I let him believe I was still that helpless kid. And then, I destroyed him. Every loophole he tried to exploit, I closed. Every argument he made, I countered. Every piece of evidence I presented, crushed his case. By the time the judge ruled in our favor, Gerald was gripping the table, his knuckles white. His client lost everything, and so did he. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to smile, because his silence was enough. But fate, it wasn't done with me yet. Because 3 days later, Alyssa Whitmore walked into my law firm, and the past I thought I had buried came knocking once again. There is no truth to these accusations, which were planned by a resentful woman and a cunning attorney. I switched off the television and grinned. The night was restless, and he was already playing defense well. I was concerned because I had prepared for every counterattack Gerald would attempt to launch against me. But since Alyssa wasn't managing it well, she had paced the safe house all evening, staring at her phone, clenched tightly in her palm. After hearing her father's media remark, which seemed like a personal betrayal, I eventually found her standing by the window, arms wrapped around herself. I ordered her to quit reading that nonsense. She didn't look at me, and I breathed. "You think this is a game?" At last, Alyssa diverted her eyes and said, "I think this is a fight we need to win." Feeling angry? Are you even concerned for my mother in this situation, or are you merely demonstrating that it hurt? So I moved closer and spoke in a calm but forceful tone. I don't fight battles. Believe it or not, she looked at my face, perhaps searching for a moment of hesitation or uncertainty. "He's going to come for you," she murmured calmly. even though there was no sign of the boy she used to know. She scowled at what I had done, so I went to my desk and grabbed an envelope that had been waiting for me. When I got back to my office that evening, I gave it to her. She pulled out the documents inside. "I filed a defamation case," I said, pushing them toward her. "Gerald is suing me directly, saying that I planned this to extort him, to destroy his career." She shook her head, her expression showing a glimmer of disbelief. "He won." I smiled. She lowered the papers with a trembling breath. "You're not afraid?" "No," I stated simply. "He is. That's why he's losing, why he's acting so carelessly, clinging to whatever straws he can find." He was correct. We escalated. The following morning, I submitted an application for a temporary restraining order. By 11 a.m., Gerald was complaining of emotional distress and possible retaliation. By noon, the judge granted it. Gerald was forced to vacate his own estate. I was incensed when his attorney, one of his few remaining supporters, sent me an email requesting a settlement meeting, a last-ditch effort to stop things before they got worse. I declined. By that afternoon, it was already too late for him. Lucas Rivers, my mentor and the only person I trusted in this field, entered my office. He sat down and threw a newspaper on my desk. I saw the headline, "Whitmore Empire Under Siege." "You're making a lot of noise, kid," Lucas said. I shrugged. "Lucas? He deserved worse." "Though I don't disagree. A man like Whitmore doesn't go down easily. Proceed with caution." Lucas looked at me for a moment before nodding. "But he's already falling." By nightfall, Gerald's life was crumbling. His once dominant law firm